Hi. In today's video, we are going to discuss about Azure Devops learning and as well as interview purpose approach for the people who are looking for a career in the Azure DevOps environment. So before I'm getting into the learning and interview purpose approach and all, I must tell you about Azure DevOps. First of all, let me explain you two different things. One is about Azure and second is DevOps. So, and before I'm going to start the session, this is the one which is intended for the people who wants to make the career in the field of Azure DevOps, etc. All that. So, what kind of learning skills you need to acquire, right? So, what kind of questions we come across when we are going for an interview, right? So, how to answer that, right? So, by keeping that into an account, I'm just giving. So, whenever I teach, whenever I mentioning here, everything will be mentioning from the basics onwards, right? So, please do remember that. Okay, so first of all, we need to understand two different things. One is about Azure and second is DevOps. Azure is already known to everyone because Azure is nothing but Windows Azure because it's powered by Windows Corporation, right? It's all Microsoft Corporation, like Windows Azure, we call it as. So Azure is a cloud-based platform. Cloud-based platform. It is as like as AWS because nowadays, whenever we are working on the projects, most of the projects earlier days were completely on on-premise solutions. Whatever the applications we used to develop, everything is on-premise, right? So you require some infrastructure. So based on that infrastructure, we'll be developing the application. That's how generally earlier the situations are. But nowadays the situation was changed to an extent possible. Most of the applications are moving to the cloud environment. Cloud environment where there are different cloud service providers, as is stated. Let's say AWS or Azure and all everything, right? These people are cloud service providers. These cloud service providers provide these cloud service providers provide different services like infrastructure service, platform as a services, all that. Three different services will be there. So one is about infrastructure as a service, because any cloud services I'm talking about, right? Any cloud services, either it can be Azure or it can be AWS and all. We have three different services. One is about infrastructure as a service. Majorly infrastructure, whatever the required infrastructure we want to develop the project, right? So this is all something comes under the infrastructure part. At the same time, platform as a service, whatever the platform you require to construct a building, to construct an application. So those platform services will be provided by the cloud service providers. At the same time, when it comes to the software as a service, whatever the required software we want to develop the application, those software services will be provided under SWS. So these are the three major services will be provided by any cloud services whenever we are moving towards the cloud applications. Because earlier, as I told you some time back, everything was on-premise applications. Now we are transforming towards the cloud applications. So whenever we are moving towards cloud applications, this is due to because of the infrastructural challenges, because whatever the infrastructure do we have, right? So infrastructure to reduce the infrastructural challenges and all, maintenance cost and all everything. For that reason, generally we are moving towards the cloud side. In connect to that, whenever we are working on the cloud service providers like AWS and Azure and all that. So Azure is one kind of cloud-based platform where we can develop the applications accordingly, right? So this is the first thing. Second, I'm going to discuss about DevOps, right? So what is DevOps stands for? DevOps means development and operations. DevOps means development and operations. This is what we call it as DevOps stands for. So in this development and operations means wherein application development will be taken place at the same time operations. For example, development means people wants to write a code for any of the project, right? So this is all something comes under the development side. For any application when we are developing, so there is some amount of code by implementing a business logic is what something we have to write. This is where we call it as development stands for. Now, what is operations? Operations means if you have developed the application before you are delivering a particular piece of work to the customer or a project, we have to deploy that. So in the beginning days, in the early days, if you see in the industry IT, you see, there will be a development, there will be a deployment team as separate. It's a separate deployment team. So what this separate deployment team do? These deployment team will write down the deployment standards, procedures, and all steps will be written. So based on the deployment will be taken place subsequently. That's how the situation earlier, because different deployment procedures using different deployment procedures and all, they used to develop and deploy the application. But over a period of time, whenever there are some changes happens in the field of IT, where the requirements used to change a lot different times, right? So when we are changing some requirements, the development will become much complicated sometimes because the effort you have to make, right? So whatever the work we have done, again, we need to do the same work again and again. So to address these things, there is always tussle between development and operations because the communication gap might be erased, might be erased. I'm not saying it will, but might be erased. There is a possibility. It requires more effort to be taken. That's the reason why there is an environment which normally we are coming nowadays is called DevOps environment. Means both development and operations will be on the same platform. So when there is in the same platform, what happen? A person who is working under DevOps engineer, let's say for example, you are a DevOps engineer working under the DevOps environment, wherein you must have an experience in under development of the particular application or a project. At the same time, even operations, even deployments, everything should be known to us. This is where generally we call it a CI/CD approach, right? So continuous integration and deployment and delivery approach is what something which normally we call in the field of IT. CI/CD approach is what something required. So implementation has of the application we have to do, both the deployment should be done by them. So further, there are different tools we use. Something like Jenkins for integration, Kubernetes, Ansible, Negois, right? So GitHub, GitLab, right? So different tools nowadays we have and all. So people who are working under DevOps engineer and all everything should be DevOps engineer and all everything should have a knowledge over these tools. Technically speaking, I'm talking about. So this is what generally the concept of DevOps. Now, what is Azure DevOps then? Azure DevOps is a kind of tool we can see because Azure DevOps is a kind of tool we can see because wherein we can even log in and we can work on it. And I posted few of my videos about Azure DevOps, Azure DevOps in my channel. I think earlier long back. I'll give some of the links in this present below to this video. I'll give you some links to you whatever Azure DevOps and how it functions, how it works. Right. So I have made some videos. I have taken some classes and all. I posted some videos even subsequently. Many, right? So I'll give the links. That's a different. So Azure DevOps is a tool or an application or a tool I can say where you can create DevOps pipeline, because if you want to create a continuous integration and as well as continuous deployment and delivery, there is some pipeline we have to create, data pipeline we have to create. So when there are any changes and all, even though those changes has to be managed in between, and the process of the application development should not have any kind of delay or disturbance. For that reason, there is a tool which normally we have to use, like creating some CI/CD pipelines, right? So at the same time, whenever we wants to work on the agile environment, if we want to write any epics user stories, right? So maintaining any kind of product backlog, right? So all these things we require some tool. It is almost something similar like Jira tool, but Jira is a tool which is majorly used for bug tracking, project tracking and bug tracking, all that. But Azure DevOps is majorly exclusively used when we are working on the DevOps environment. Whenever we are working on the DevOps environment, this is what something which we have to be known with, right? So this is what generally Azure DevOps is a kind of tool which is used majorly for the development of the application by creating epics, user stories, etc. At the same time, creating some CI/CD pipelines, right? So all these things can be done by the team. This is where generally Azure DevOps tool is all about. Now, when it comes to the learning purpose, right? So what is that we need to do in context to the learning? So a person who wants to transform their career into the field of cloud, especially in the field of Agile, especially in the field of Azure DevOps and all, as part of role as a DevOps engineer, because some of the people nowadays wants to move towards their DevOps engineer side. So whenever they wants to move towards DevOps engineering, anyway, these people have to learn about different tools like Jenkins, Kubernetes, Ansible, Negois, all that. In addition to that, they must have a knowledge about Azure DevOps tool, how this Azure DevOps tool can be will work, right? So how this creation of data pipelines, CI/CD pipelines will be used. So this sort of knowledge, this sort of understanding is essentially required for any people whenever they are working. This is where generally learning is required. So learning nothing but learning the process of high level. This point is high level process of Azure DevOps. At the same time, creating epics and user stories, followed by that right. So creating epics and user stories, followed by this CI/CD pipeline, right? So whatever the CI/CD pipeline process and all everything, understanding over the CI/CD pipeline and creating these pipelines is also something which we need to learn. Okay, this is also something which we have to learn with. So these are the major learnings I'm talking about, because I'm not explaining the course curriculum. Okay, so if you want to know about more information about what Azure DevOps you will be going through and while you are going through the training, right? So teaching and all, you can reach out to me if you want. That's a different thing, optional. So process of Azure DevOps is what something we need to learn, right? So if you want to become an Azure DevOps engineer, or maybe if you want to have some knowledge over Azure DevOps, process of Azure DevOps is required. At the same time, we need to have an understanding over how to create epics user stories. So followed by creation of CI/CD pipelines, right? So all these things is all comes under the learning perspective. Now, when it comes to the interview purpose, right? So whenever you are applying for any job opportunities and all that, people will always expect you, do you have any experience in creating CI/CD pipelines, right? So pipelines or not, right? So this is what something out of my experience I'm mentioning these points, because I may not be mentioning all the points relating to interview purpose, because as it is a limited environment. So, but to the extent possible, whatever I can cover in this short video, I'm just making it, okay? Make a point of it. So do you have any experience in understanding our CI/CD pipelines and all? Everything is what something which people will expect you to have some knowledge over this. This is one thing which you have to be good and familiar with, right? So do you have any experience or not, right? So this is the first thing which, so that it's always important for you to work on learning Azure DevOps and all everything, so that you will be understood about this well, right? This is point number one. Point number two, they may expect you to have a knowledge over knowledge or experience, whatever I can call. Knowledge over Azure DevOps or Azure environment, Azure cloud environment. Because Azure cloud environment is being used for different purposes, right? As I told you, right? It's infrastructure or a platform or a software services. So knowledge over Azure environment is also something essentially required. So knowledge over Microsoft Azure, right? Do you have any knowledge over Azure environment or not, right? So this is also something which people will expect you to have the knowledge of it, right? So this is the second point. And second, they may expect you to have a knowledge over different DevOps tools, something like Jenkins, Kubernetes, all that, right? So Jenkins is an integration tool we use. At the same time, Kubernetes. Kubernetes is also one of the key and prominent tool nowadays we can see in the DevOps environment. I'll give you an example what exactly Kubernetes is being used and why and for what purpose Kubernetes is being used. So Kubernetes is something that, let's say, for example, you are developing an application, a banking application, for example. Banking, there are multiple applications you are developing for a banking solution. Now, if you want to deploy these applications, what you have to do, you need to have a physical systems as separate. And whatever the deployment we are doing for a particular application, you have to deploy on different physical systems. That's how usually it was. That's how the requirement was. So when in the real world, when you are moving this to the client or customer end perspective, it's always difficult for them to understand because infrastructure will be more physical systems you required for the deploying this application in different environments for different applications. Let's say there are 4 applications, you require 4 systems to do that. So infrastructure cost will be more, complexity will be more, you require more manpower for any organization. Maintenance cost will also be much higher. The reason what normally Kubernetes is a tool is something which how it works like. For example, we'll be taking one physical system where it will be installed, right? Some virtual machine will be installed in it. So that how many applications you want to deploy, you can deploy all the applications in that particular Java virtual machine only. Something like JVM kind of, right? Java virtual machine you see in Java. The same way, right? Its virtual machine will be there. We create a virtual machine. In that virtual machine, we deploy multiple applications so that infrastructure cost won't be there. If there is no infrastructure, lot of infrastructure is involved, automatically complexity will also come down. Cost which you have to spend for the infrastructure will also come down. Complexity, reducing of infrastructure cost, manpower, everything can be reduced. This is for that reason, generally there is a tool called Kubernetes is what something we use. Like this, there are other tools called Ansible, right? So Nego is, right? So etc. Right? So of course there are a lot many, right? So GitHub, GitLab, right? So we have different tools, of course, right? So even for code management, right? So Bitbucket, GitHub, right? So source code management for that GitHub is being used, right? So different tools, right? So understanding over different DevOps tools is also something which we have to be known with. So 2 different things. One is learning about Azure DevOps is one thing, or knowing about Azure DevOps tool, how it functions and all, everything is something which people will expect you. At the same time, in connect to that, anyway, knowing about Azure environment is required, cloud environment. Followed by this, we need to have a knowledge over the DevOps tools. These DevOps tools may vary from what we call these DevOps tools may vary from profile to profile because I don't say everybody required to have a knowledge over these tools, right? So if you are a DevOps engineer, yes, it is required. But there are other profiles apart from DevOps engineering profiles where people will expect you to have a knowledge over DevOps environment. So DevOps environment on a high level note in some profiles, something like when you are moving towards business analyst role, all that. They must be having experience over that, understanding over DevOps and all, not creating CI/CD pipelines, right? They're not something which they expect. But DevOps tools and all, if you are moving towards the implementation side, application development as a development side, of course, yes, DevOps tools, Jenkins, Kubernetes, Ansible, Nego is a lot of GitHub, right? Understanding over. So these are the things which you need to be good with. So this is what something which being a person, when we are applying for job opportunities in context with Azure DevOps, is what something you have to be good with when you are attending for an interview, right? So you need to have a complete understanding over CI/CD pipeline structure. You need to have a knowledge right from the basics of Azure environment and how this is being used. What are the services are they used here, right? So at the same time, Azure, again, cloud services, it can be a public cloud, it can be a private cloud, it can be a hybrid cloud, right? So different cloud service providers, providers will provide different services, right? So this is required. At the same time, having knowledge over different DevOps tools and all everything is what something which people will expect you in an interview. So learning as well as interview approach. These are the few things, because as I mentioned in the beginning, in the middle of the video, right? So as it is a short video I'm making, right? So it's an instant video I'm making, so that I've just mentioned few points, not the detailed parts of interview, right? So because anyway, you guys are going through the JD and all, so that you will be knowing well. At the same time, knowledge over agile nowadays is also one more point I have forgotten, right? So having a knowledge over agile environment, these people may expect you. Do you have any experience over agile environment? If again in agile environment, some people will have experience in Scrum framework, right? So some people may have experience on Kanban. Some people may have experience in XP approach, right? So in this XP approach, TDD approach, right? So test-driven development, behavioral-driven development, model-driven development, feature-driven development, right? These are all something which, so this is something optional, I can say, because these XP and all everything are not much related and relevant for you. That's not required, like, because people who are moving towards agile environment and all everything, those people required to have a knowledge over extreme programming, like test-driven development or behavioral-driven development, model-driven development, feature-driven development, all that. Pair programming, not that knowledge is required. So, but agile environment, Scrum and all everything is always helpful to you when you are moving towards Azure DevOps or DevOps environment is all about. I hope this is what all about this video. If you have any questions, if you have any training as well as coaching needs in this regard, please reach out to the contact details, which will be posted in below to this video. Thank you.